If you did the Notion subscription build with me a few videos ago, you were going to love this video because we are leveling up that tracker and turning it into a fully functional bill pay tracker. So one of the limitations with that subscription tracker is that it only accounted for automatic payments that you're kind of like hands off, you didn't need to do anything with. It was mainly just to organize all your subscriptions. But with the added functionality and formulas that we're going to add to it to turn it into a bill pay tracker, this way those bills you pay manually that you need to go into the website and initiate a transaction, you're going to be able to record those inside Notion, and then it's going to tell you on that bill pay calendar whether that bill has been paid, whether it's overdue, or like how many days until it's due. So we're going to add all of that to this tracker. So you do need to have this build done up to that point. If you don't, pause this video, go to the link in my description and watch the subscription build with me, build your tracker, and then come back to this one because we're just going to be adding on top of it. If you get halfway through this video and you're like, I am not so sure about this DIY anymore, I bit off more than I can chew, there is a link to this template in my shop, and it also has some added functionality and features, including debt pay tracking as well. So you don't have to DIY it, but if you're interested in that, keep watching this video because we're going to go through it. It does require some more advanced formulas, still those if statements that we worked on before. We'll go super slow, and I promise you are going to get it, and you're going to feel so empowered by the end to have something in Notion that you built yourself. Let's go into Notion, and this page should be very familiar to you. This is what we built before. We are going to need to add a new database, however, to this page, a transactions database, so that that's a place where we can put our payments that relate to the bills and subscriptions that we have. Now, also, before we do that, if you want to change these titles, you can to make them a little bit more generic to cover all bills instead of just subscriptions. So we can do bills and subscriptions, whatever you would like. Under this category section where we've categorized each of our bills and subscriptions, we're going to add that new database. So I am going to do /command, and we'll do a table view database. We're going to click new table and label it transactions. I'm also, so that we have a little bit wider space to work with, I'm going to turn this actually into a page. I should have probably started out with that, but I'm going to click the domino icon and click turn into page. Now we can open it up. We have a lot more space to work with. So add whatever icon you want, whatever cover photo you want for transactions. I'll just pick something here. The name property is going to be what kind of payment it was, credit card payment, bill payment, etc. And then we don't need this tag property, so we're going to delete that, but we do need a payment date property. So let's click the plus sign and go to date and payment date. We'll rename it. And we'll slide that over to the left. I like to see that before the name. Now the next property is an optional property. You do not need to track the amount of payment that you're making because what we're doing right now does not include debt pay tracking where you need to know like how much you're paying against your debt. Whether you have an amount in there or not is not going to reflect on whether the bill is paid or not. But if it's something that you just want to keep track of because that's something you're interested in knowing, then you can add a number property and we'll type amount. We're also going to need to change the number format to US dollar or whatever currency you use. And I'm going to change the icon to something a little more currency-like. Now we need to, like I said before, relate this to our bills and subscription database. So I'm going to do the plus sign and add a relation property. This is just another way of saying we're connecting two databases. So find your database. Mine is labeled subscriptions here. And I do want this to show on subscriptions. So let's label this transactions. And I'm going to say this is a bill or subscription. Okay, add relation, and we're done with this database. Super, super easy. So let's go back into the bill tracker, and I'm just going to add a dividing line just to kind of divide that from the category section. Now we're going to get into actually adding on to our bills and subscriptions database. So let's open one of these up so we can add in the different properties. And the first property that we are going to start with is super simple. We're going to warm you up here, and it's going to be a checkbox property to say whether this bill or subscription is on auto pay or not, because the formulas that we're going to do later on is going to be based on whether that property is checked or not. We want to do different things to it. So add a checkbox property, label it auto pay, give it an icon. I'm going to drag it up here to the top. And all of these right here are auto pay. So I'll just click those. But just to test the formulas that we're going to be doing, let's create one that is not on auto pay. So let's say we have a Chase credit card payment, and that is due monthly. The amount changes every time, so we're not going to put anything in there. We'll add an icon to it so it looks nice. The category, obviously you can have as many categories as you want. You could put this in a credit card category. I'm just going to leave that blank just for now. We're not going to worry about it. And then you have the properties that we had added in the last video that we worked on this. So the thing that we need to do after our auto pay checkbox property is added is to figure out when our last due date was. So we have this next payment date. So actually, let me do a start date of like March 15th. And so right now it is May 21st. So that's why it says my next payment. Remember that doozy of a formula? The next payment is on June 15th. So we need to say, when was the last payment due, or the last due date? And this will play a part in a future formula of when that last due date is. Something quickly that I want to mention is we are not adding a paid property in terms of like a checkbox, like a manual paid property. I've seen a lot of bill trackers out in the wild do this, and honestly, I think it's kind of annoying because it's very manual. You have to manually check it. If you want to use the same Notion page, you have to manually uncheck it before it rolls over to the next month. So you have to remember to do that. Or like this Chase credit card is monthly, so you've got to duplicate this 12 times so that each one you can check paid. So what we're doing today is going to automate that process as much as possible. So it starts with that last due date. And because it's very similar, it's just kind of reversing the next payment date. Instead of writing the formula out, let's just take the easy route and duplicate that property. So you can do that by clicking on the domino icon and duplicate. Let's actually rename this last due date. And we'll do an arrow in a different facing direction. Now there's two things that we need to replace in this property. This start date, we don't want this to be dependent on the start date anymore. We want this to be dependent on the next payment date. We need kind of the 1 year or 1 quarter or 1 month previous. So we're going to change out the start date to next payment date, and we're going to change all these plus signs to minus signs. So you can just delete the start date property, choose next payment, and you'll know it's correctly selected when it's in shaded gray. So you just need to go ahead and do that for each of these sections. And then when you hit a plus sign, you need to change it to a minus sign. All right, so it worked when you know that the last due date is right before the next payment based on the cycle. This one is monthly, so June 15th is the next payment, May 15th is the last payment. Now we want to roll up our last actual payment that we made from our transaction database that we created. So there's nothing in here yet, but let's just, for kicks, say that we made a payment, let's see, It was on the 15th was the last one. So we'll just do May 14th, and we'll say that this was a credit card payment. And actually what you can do is, and what I would do is I would create a template so that anytime you add a new payment, it applies the properties that you want to have. So to add a new template on this database, you click the drop down next to new template, new payment, and then you can add the icon, and that's how the icons will apply automatically, so you don't have to check it every single time. So we'll do a party popper for we paid it. And then the payment date, we can say that when this template is used, set it to today. So we'll add that template, go back into transactions, and let's actually apply that template. And the bill or subscription is going to be that Chase credit card. We don't need to have the amount there. So we'll go back to the Chase credit card, and you can see under transactions that it's pulling in a credit card payment. Something that I would do, and I know I'm like stalling on the last payment date roll up, but this is all the steps that we have to do. Something that I like is to click the domino icon and show the transactions as a page section. So you see how like it pops it down there and then it's more organized. And then you can add the different properties that you want to see. Like maybe you want to see the payment date, maybe you want to see the amount if you track that. And that way you just have like an ongoing record list of all the payments you made for this specific bill. But getting to the last payment date roll up, now that we have some data in the transaction database, let's add a property. A lot of people get confused about roll ups, and I had a hard time understanding them for the longest time. But basically, after you've related a database to one another, a roll up is kind of grabbing information from that database. So we want to grab the last payment date for this particular bill. So last payment date. And then we're going to select the relation. We want it from the transactions database. We also want to pull in the date, and we want to make sure that we're calculating the date as the latest date, so that when you add more and more payments, it's always taking the latest date and putting it in here for you. So we made a payment on the 14th. It was last due on 15th. All right, so those were kind of like easy softballs. Now we get into the formula, which is a huge beast. Let me show you what we're going to attempt to do so you kind of know as we're going through it what we're trying to achieve. So over here in my finance dashboard, I have a bill pay calendar, and I have a formula giving me some text options. So it's saying when my bill is due based on where we are today. So due in 1 day, due in 8 days, etc. It's also styling it for me. So bills that are red, say due in X days, that are red are ones that are not on auto pay. So on auto pay, like I don't need to worry about those. So that's why this, my Substack subscriptions, that's why they're in just like plain text. I don't need to do anything, but the red tells me I need to make a manual payment before that due date. I also have when a payment is made, it says bill paid. So this is the formula. Take a good look at it. I know it looks difficult, but we're going to break it down. But this is the formula that we are going to do. It's a multiple if statement formula, which you are used to if you did the subscription tracker build with me. And we're going to get through it. I promise. So let's go over to transactions the bill pay tracker. And we're going to add a new property, a new formula property. And we're going to label this due text because it's going to spit out text based on like when we have paid this specific bill. And then we get to start adding in our formula. So we want to start with if something is auto pay or not, what do we want to do with it? So let's do our multiple if statement by doing IFS. And we're going to put if auto pay is true, then we're going to say how many days it's due in, but we're not going to style it at all like you saw in my finance tracker. So if auto pay is checked, then we need to say due in X days. So every text string has to be in quotation marks, so due in, and I always do a space because it likes to smush them together. If you put a formula in there in between, which is what we are going to do. So due in, I'm going to close that string, plus now we need that number. How do we get that number of days that it is due? Well, it needs to be the number of days between where we are now and that next payment date. So we have a date between function that we need to add. The date between our next payment date and today. And we want to make sure that it's calculating that in days. But then, and don't let this be confusing to you, we need to add in the actual text days so that it says due in this number of days. So we're going to do another plus sign and another text string of days. Now let's check, and before we add on to this, and make sure that it works. So we're going to click done. And there's no due text here because it's not an auto pay. And we said if auto pay is checked. So let's go to the main bill tracker page and go into Netflix. And you can see it says due in 25 days. Now you see how it's squished together? That is because I didn't do an extra space on this end. So have those spaces if you don't want the formula and the text to be squished together like that. So that's working. So let's go back into Chase credit card and continue adding on to this formula. So we need to go back in and do a comma because we're continuing the if statement. And the next thing we want to do is account for whether the last payment date is empty or not. So sometimes that can like throw you off when you're first starting this out because you're not going to have those payments recorded in your transaction database yet. And if it sees that as empty, it's going to not know what to do. So we need, even though we're only going to use this for like the first time, we do need to have it in this formula. So we need to say last payment date if that is empty. So we'll do the little dot and empty to kind of apply empty to last payment date. If that's empty, and we're going to do auto pay is false, so it's not true, then we want to say the same phrase here, but we want to style it red because remember, if auto pay is false, we want to make sure that it's red so we can see it very clearly. So to style something, and all I did was copy and paste that formula from the top to the middle here, you're going to do a dot and style. And then in those parentheses, if you want to style it bold, you can do B in quotation marks. You can do a comma and add more styling and add a color red. Notion can read basically the primary colors. So now I want to see if that is going to work. It's nice to be able to like check your formula before you get all the way in and do everything, and then you're like, something's wrong and I don't know what it is. So we're going to click done. And because I do have a payment date here, this is our only not auto pay, so last payment date is filled. Let's actually unlink this page so we can see it populate. Okay, and here's where I did a mistake actually. So I only styled days. So I needed to put in more parentheses around the phrase that I want styled. So easy to do, but in case that happens, that is how you fix it. So how are we feeling? Feeling good? I think you're going to get it. We still need to add a few more conditions to our if statement. So let's continue on. If at any time you need to pause the video and rewatch a few sections, totally feel free to do that. So I'm going to do another comma. And the next section is to actually say whether the bill is paid or not. Now, the way this is in Notion is a little bit funny. We have to like define a certain number of days to say if a payment has been made within this time frame, then make it bill paid. We have to do that just to be able to provide that structure. So to get that, we need to say, has there been a last payment date made? And how close is it? Is it within a certain number of days to that next payment? I like to choose 10, and I'll show you how we do that. and I'll explain why when we get to that section. But so we want to basically say that the date between, so we're using that date between function again, the next payment and the last payment date, so the last payment that we made in days, that is less than or equal to 10. You could change that number if you wanted to change it to 5 or 8. I just wouldn't go above 10, and I definitely wouldn't do like 14 or 15 just because it can be sticky when you get into a month like February that has only 28 days. Because on the other side of the formula, when it's overdue, we're going to say, is it outside that 10-date range? And if so, then it's overdue. So if we have like 15 and 15 and there's 28 days in February, like, does that make sense? So we need to say when the payment is due or when the payment was made, is that within 10 days of the due date? And if you happen to pay it 11 days previous to the due date, that's fine. Just change that date to at least 10 days before so that Notion can read it properly. So let's go ahead and test this one. Oh, you know what? We need to say whether bill is paid. We have the condition. We don't have what's happening with it. So if this is happening, we want to say bill paid. So let's do some text in quotations, bill paid. And I'm going to add an emoji to it as well. So to bring up an emoji keyboard on the Mac is Control Command Space. And let's add the party emoji and close that up. Add the end parentheses. And now let's go back into transactions and apply that bill again so that we can see if this works. So we need to actually do another one to make sure it works because this is saying our next due date is the 15th. So we could actually, if we wanted to, probably just change this to the 14th. Yeah, and it says bill paid. So I do actually want to style this green. So let's go in and do the dot style and bold and green. Go. And now it says bill paid in green. So you can see how that works. So we're still doing good on this formula. 2 more formula sections to do. Now we need to say, how do we know that the bill has not been paid and it's actually overdue? So like the last payment date is within 10 days of the next payment, if we're going to use that date between function again, if the last due date and the last payment date in days are greater than 10. If that happens, then we want to say overdue. So I'm going to bring up the emoji keyboard again and do the alert sign and let's see, overdue. We'll do another alert and it's yelling at me because I didn't put these in quotation marks. And let's also style this red so it shows up. So, or add that style function and bold and red. So do you see like what we're getting at? So if the last payment date is like more than 10 days out from the last due date, it's going to trigger that was a missed payment and it's going to say it's overdue. So let's double check this. So I'm going to change this back to May 14th. And I'm going to, let's say, so the last due date was May 15th. So let's say we missed that payment and we made April's payment. So we went back, it was due April 15th before that, and we made it directly on that day. It's saying overdue because we missed that May 15th payment. It's looking for a payment within 10 days of May 15th and it's not finding it. So it's saying that it's overdue. So we're doing good here. Our last part of this formula is just going to say if none of this is true, if none of this is happening, then we just want it to say due in X days and style it red because it's automatically going to be a non-auto pay payment. So we'll do, actually we can just copy and paste this little phrase up here and put that down here. And then we want to style it red. So I want to style the whole thing red and actually not have it only do partially like I did before. So I'm making sure that phrase is in parentheses and the dot style. And we're going to say bold, B for bold and red. There we go. So now we can go into each of these, doing 314 days, and it's not styled in any way because these are auto pay. We can go into the calendar, and something that I would do, let's see, we had some things happening on the 15th, is to be able to show that text on the calendar like I have on mine, so you can see at a glance what is due and when. So go to the three dots at the top right of the calendar, go to properties, and then you can show that due text property, and it's going to show that Chase is overdue, and it's going to show that Netflix is due in 25 days. Nothing wrong with it because that's a recurring subscription that we don't have to touch. All right, how are we feeling about this? I know you're gonna get it, and if you stumble through the formula a little bit, that's totally fine and totally normal as you're learning formulas. I will have a page, a link in the description that links to a page that has these formulas that we added on it in case you want to copy and paste, but I do want you to try it because if you really want to learn Notion, especially understand formulas and how they work, it's going to be really good to kind of go along with it with me so that you know what we're telling Notion to do. So some final modifications that you could do is if you didn't have your calendar out to check and you wanted anything that was overdue to show immediately, I might create a separate section on the side here that was overdue bills, just in case, sometimes it happens. As much as you try to avoid it, sometimes we just forget. So we want to do a linked view of a database of the subscription database that we were just working with. So linked view. And let's actually, select that database. I'm going to do a new table view because I want this to be a list view. I think that's a little bit more streamlined. I'm going to take off the database title. Maybe I want to change this to alert, like a warning sign. And then I also need to add a filter to this. So the filter is going to be if that due text says overdue, then show up here. And we may want to also add in that overdue or that due text property. We can take that date off just to show right away. So if you're on just the table view, you can see right away that you have a bill or two that's overdue that you need to take care of. The next thing that you may want to do is add a make payment button to your calendar. So I have that on my page that when I click that, it will make that payment and automatically relate it to that bill. So it's a little bit less like clicking around. So to do that, we need to go into one of these bills and add a new property. So this is a database button property that's new in Notion as of, I would say, a few months ago. They're really fun to play with. At first I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do with this. And I keep finding examples on what to do with this. So let me know in the comments if you want me to do a video on database buttons or buttons in general and some of the fun things that you could use them for. So this is going to be a payment button. And the label, I want this to say make payment. And then we get to tell the button what to do when it's clicked. So I'm going to click add an action, and I want to add a page. When this is clicked, add a page to the transaction database. So we'll select that database, transactions. And I'm actually, something that you may want to do, let's press pause on this for a minute. Go back over to transactions. You may want to add a template to this. We did add a template, didn't we? We added a template. See, I can't even remember in my own video. What I think we need to do though is make it default so that it automatically applies every time we add a new transaction. So I'm going to say set as default for all views. Let's go back into that card and continue working on that button. So now we can say add page to transactions as new payment. So it's going to have that template that we created for it. And then the only other thing that I want to do, because the payment date's already with the template going to be to today, whenever you click that button, I'm going to add bill or subscription, and I'm going to say, make sure you set it to this page. So it automatically applies it. And then I also want it to open up, because I don't want it to just create the page and then I have to go find it. So you can click open page, open the new page that we added, not this page, and it's in center peak, or you could say full page or side peak, whatever your preference was. So now let's go over to the calendar and go back over to June, where we have these 2 items showing here as an example, and go to the 3 dots and the properties and make sure that button is showing up. So now this is overdue. I want to make a payment for it. So I can click make payment, and you see it opened up. So I could say Chase payment, credit card payment. It already applied the emoji, it applied the payment date, and it sent it to, or it connected it to the actual bill or subscription that I wanted to pay. And look, it also got rid of that bill from the overdue bill section. And if you go into transactions, it's showing here. Now it's still saying this is just something to be aware of, not that you're going to have a lot of overdue bills, but we want this all to work in different scenarios. So it does still say due in 25 days, even though we made a payment, because that payment in May 21st is going towards the last due date of May 15th. So you still have to make that June 15th payment, if that makes sense. And remember, you do not have to click make payment on any of those recurring subscriptions, which we have called out so you know the difference, whereas the red due in X number of days is what you actually have to manually pay. And the plain text one, you can just leave alone. It's just there so it's organized and you know when it's coming out. I want you to be so proud of yourself for working on this and getting through this video. Like, this is tough stuff. This is advanced stuff that we are working through, but it is amazing how powerful Notion can be and the things that you can do in it, and how it just makes our lives so much easier. Like, yeah, the setup takes a little bit, but once you get it set up, once you're using it, you don't have to even really think twice about it because everything is organized inside Notion. So I've got lots of other Notion videos that you may want to watch. I also have one that is a simpler build if you need a palette cleanser, so I'll put it up here. It is a habit tracker build, very, very easy, but very, very useful too. I use mine all the time. I have about 6 different habits that I track. But if you have any questions about this build tracker in general, let me know in the comments below. And if you decide it's not for you, you always have that template option in my shop if you want to grab that as well. But I'm so excited to connect with you in the comments, and I will see you in the next video.